Gentlemen and ladies, today we once again continue the story of the last year of the First Era, 2920. And we're going to sit on this bench today. I feel like I'm just noticing that there's a bench over here. Kind of a cool little spot. You can see the whole room. Not too shabby. And we are in the second half of the year. We got 3 books we're going to be reading today. Let's see, how long are these books? What was that, 1926? And, oh guys, this is going to be a long one. No denying that. Sun's Height, Book 7 of 2920, the last year of the First Era. The 4th of Sun's Height, 2920, the Imperial City, Cyrodiil. The Emperor Riemann III and his potentate Du Shai took a stroll around the Imperial Gardens. Studded with statuary and fountains, the North Gardens fit the Emperor's mood, as well as being the coolest acreage in the city during the heat of summertide. Austere, tiered flower beds of blue, gray, and green towered all around them as they walked. "Vivek has agreed to the prince's terms for peace," said Riemann. "My son will be returning in 2 weeks' time." "This is excellent news," said the potentate carefully. "I hope the Dunmer will honor the terms. We might have asked for more. The fortress at Black Gate, for example, but I suppose the prince knows what is reasonable. He would not cripple the empire just for peace." "I have been thinking lately of Rija and what caused her to plot against my life," said the Emperor, pausing to admire a statue of the slave queen Alessia before continuing. "The only thing I can think of to account for it is that she admired my son too much. She may have loved me for my power and my personality, but he, after all, is young and handsome and will one day inherit my throne. She must have thought that if I were dead, she could have an emperor who had both youth and power." "The prince was in on this plot?" asked Du Shai. It was a difficult game to play, anticipating where the Emperor's paranoia would strike next. "Oh, I don't think so," said Riemann, smiling. "No, my son loves me well. Are you aware that Korda, Raja's sister, is in an initiate of the Morwa Conservatorium in Hegath?" asked the potentate. What the hell? I don't even know what the hell that sentence just meant. "Morwa?" asked the Emperor. "I've forgotten. Which god is that?" "Lusty fertility goddess of the Yakutans," replied the potentate. "But not too lusty, like Debella. Demure, but certainly sexual. I am through with lusty women. The Empress, Rija, all too lusty. A lust for love leaves a lust for power." The Emperor shrugged his shoulders. "But a priestess in training with a certain healthy appetite sounds ideal. Now what were you saying about the Black Gate?" Sixth of Sun's Height, 2920, Thurzo Fortress in Cyrodiil. Rija stood quietly looking at the cold stone floor while the Emperor spoke. He had never before seen her so pale and joyless. She might at least be pleased that she was being freed, being returned to her homeland. Why, if she left now, she could be in Hammerfell by the Merchants' Festival. Nothing he said seemed to register any reaction from her. A month and a half stay in Thurzo Fortress seemed to have killed her spirit. "I was thinking," said the Emperor at last, "of having your younger sister, Korda, up to the palace for a time. I think she would prefer it over the conservatorium in Hegath, don't you?" Reaction at last. Rija looked at the Emperor with animal hatred, flinging herself at him in a rage. Her fingernails had grown long since her imprisonment, and she raked them across his face, into his eyes. He howled with pain, and his guards pulled her off, pummeling her with blows from the back of their swords until she was knocked unconscious. A healer was called at once, but for the Emperor Riemann III had lost his right eye. God damn, he really lost his eye from that. Dude was just going over there to fucking annoy her. Why do you get that close, huh? Is she not chained up? Like, how the fuck does that happen? 23rd of Sun's Height, 2920, Balmora, Morrowind. Vivek pulled himself from the water, feeling the heat of the day washed from his skin, taking a towel from one of his servants. Sathasil watched his old friend from the balcony. "It looks like you've picked up a few more scars since I last saw you," said the sorcerer. "Azura grant it that I have no more for a while," laughed Vivek. "When did you arrive?" "A little over an hour ago," said Sathasil, walking down the stairs to the water's edge. "I thought it was coming to end a war, but it seems you've done it without me." Yes, 80 years is long enough for ceaseless battle, replied Vivek, embracing Sathasil. We made concessions, but so did they. When the old emperor is dead, we may be entering a golden age. Prince Juliak is very wise for his age. Where is Almalexia? Collecting the Duke of Mournhold. They should be here tomorrow afternoon. The men were distracted at a sight from around the corner of the palace. A rider was approaching through the town, heading for the front steps. It was evident that the woman had been riding hard for some time. They met her in the study, where she burst in, breathing hard. We have been betrayed, she gasped. The Imperial Army has seized the Black Gate. Aw shit, the fucking Emperor himself. 24th of Sun's Height, 2920, Balmora, Morrowind. It was the first time in 17 years that the three members of the Morrowind Tribunal had met in the same place since Sathasil had left for Ateum. All three wished that the circumstances of their reunion were different. From what we've learned, while the prince was returning to Cyrodiil to the south, a second Imperial army came down from the north, said Vivek to his stony-faced compatriots. It is reasonable to assume Juliak didn't know about the attack, but neither would it be unreasonable to suppose that he planned on being a distraction while the Emperor launched the attack on Black Gate, said Sathasil. This must be considered a break of the truce. Where is the Duke of Mournhold? Asked Vivek. I would hear his thoughts on the matter. He is meeting with the Night Mother. Wait, the Night Mother is like an actual thing during this time? Motherfucker, what? He is meeting with the Night Mother in Tel Aran, said Almalexia quietly. I told him to wait until he had spoken with you, but he said that the matter had waited long enough. He would involve the Morag Tong. In outside affairs? Vivek shook his head and looked at Sathasil. Please, do what you can. Assassination will only move us backwards. This matter must be settled with diplomacy or battle. 25th of Sun's Height, 2920, Tel Aran, Morrowind. The Night Mother met Sathasil in her salon, lit only by the moon. She was cruelly beautiful, dressed in a simple silk black robe, lounging across her divan. With a gesture, she dismissed her red-cloaked guards and offered the sorcerer some wine. You've only just missed your friend, the Duke, she whispered. He was very unhappy, but I think we will solve his problem for him. Did he hire the Morag Tong to assassinate the Emperor? Asked Sathasil. You are straightforward, aren't you? That's good. I love plain-speaking men. It saves so much time. Of course, I cannot discuss with you what the Duke and I talked about, she smiled. It would be bad for business. What if I were to offer you an equal amount of gold for you not to assassinate the Emperor? The Morag Tong murders for the glory of Mafala and for profit, she said, speaking into her glass of wine. We do not merely kill. That would be sacrilege. Once the Duke's gold has arrived in 3 days' time, we will do our end of the business, and I'm afraid we would not dream of entertaining a counteroffer. Though we are a business as well as a religious order, we do not bow to supply and demand, Sathasil. That is not quite the case in Skyrim, towards the end of the main storyline. 27th of Sun's Height, 2920, the Inner Sea, Morrowind. Sathasil had been watching the waters for 2 days now, waiting for a particular vessel, and now he saw it. A heavy ship with the flag of Mournhold. The sorcerer took the air and intercepted it before it reached harbor. A call of flame erupted over his figure, disguising his voice and form into that of a Daedra. "Abandon your ship," he bellowed, if you will not sink with it. In truth, Sathasil could have exploded the vessel with but a single ball of fire, but he chose to take his time, to give the crew a chance to dive off into the warm water. When he was certain there was no one living aboard, he focused his energy into a destructive wave that shook the air and water as it discharged. The ship and the Duke's payment to the Morag Tong sunk to the bottom of the Inner Sea. Night Mother, thought Sathasil as he floated towards shore to alert the harbor master that some sailors were in need of rescue. Everyone bows to supply and demand. The years continued, and last seed. One would think that last seed would be... Oh, I suppose last seed is like planting the last seeds of the year. What is the last actual month of the year? Evening Star? Alright. Last seed. That's a long one, huh? Last Seed, Book 8 of 2920, The Last Year of the First Era, by Karlovac Townway. Why am I just now saying who the fuck wrote these books? First of Last Seed, 2920, Mournhold, Morrowind. They were gathered in the Duke's quarters at twilight, enjoying the smell and warmth of a fire of dry branches and bitter green leaves. Tiny embers flew into the sky, hanging for a few moments before vanishing. "I was rash," agreed the Duke, soberly, but Lorcan had his laugh, and all is well. The Morag Tong will not assassinate the Emperor now that my payment to them is at the bottom of the inner sea. I thought you had made some sort of a truce with the Daedra princes." "What your sailors called a Daedra may not have been one," said Sathasil. "Perhaps it was a rogue battle mage, or even a lightning bolt that destroyed your ship. The prince and the Emperor are en route to take possession of Ald Lambasi, as our truce agreed. It is certainly typical of the Cyrodiil to assume that their concessions are negotiable, while ours are not." Vivek pulled out a map. "We can meet them here, in this village to the northwest of Ald Lambasi, Fervithil. But will we meet them to talk?" asked Almalexia, "or to make war?" No one had an answer for that. 15th of last sea, 2920. Fernthil Morrowind. A late summer squall blew through the small village, darkening the sky except for the flashing of lightning which leapt from cloud to cloud like acrobats. Water rushed down the narrow streets ankle deep, and the prince had to shout to be heard by his captains, but a few feet away from him. "There's an inn up ahead! We'll wait there for the storm to pass before pressing on to aid Lambasi." I don't know why I'm suddenly putting on an accent. The inn was warm and dry and bustling with business. Barmaids were rushing back and forth, bringing grief and wine to a back room, evidently excited about a famous visitor, someone who was attracting more attention than the mere heir to the empire of Tamriel. Amused, Juliet watched them run until he overheard the name of Vivek. "My Lord Vivek," he said, bursting into the back room, "you must believe me. I knew nothing about the attack on Blackgate until after it happened. We will, of course, be returning it to your care forthwith. I wrote you a letter to that effect at your palace in Balmora, but obviously you're not there." He paused, taking in many new faces in the room. "I'm sorry, let me introduce myself. I'm Julik Cyrodiil." "My name is Almalexia," said the most beautiful woman the prince had ever seen. "Won't you join us?" "Sathasil," said a serious-looking Dunmer in a white cloak, shaking the prince's hand and showing him to a seat. "Indaril Brindisi Doram, Duke Prince of Mournhold," said the massively built Maya next to him as he sat down. "I recognize that the events of the last month suggest, at best, that the Imperial army is not under my control," said the prince after ordering some wine. "This is true. The army is my father's." "I understood that the Emperor was going to be coming to Ald Lambasi as well," said Almalexia. "Officially, he is," said the prince cautiously. Unofficially, he's still back in the Imperial City. He's met with an unfortunate accident." Vivek glanced at the Duke quickly before looking at the prince. "An accident?" "He's fine," said the prince quickly. "He'll live, but it looks like he'll lose an eye. It was an altercation that has nothing to do with the war. The only good news is that while he recovers, I have the use of his seal. Any agreements we make here and now will be binding to the Empire, both in my father's reign and in mine." "Then let's start agreeing," smiled Almalexia. 16th of last sea, 2920. Rathnaga, Cyrodiil. The tiny hamlet of Rathnaga greeted Cassir, with its colorful houses perched on a promontory overlooking the stretch of the Hrothgarian mountain plain and high rock beyond. I feel like Rathnaga, that sounds like a place that we've actually been to. I could be wrong. Had he been in a better mood, the sights would have been breathtaking. As it was, he could only think that in practical terms, a small village like this would have meager provisions for himself and his horse. He rode down into the main square, where an inn called the Eagle's Cry stood. Directing the stable boy to house and feed his horse, Cassir walked into the inn and was surprised by its ambience. A minstrel he had heard play once in Gilderdale was performing a jaunty old tune to the clapping of the mountain men. Such forced merriment was not what Cassir wanted at that moment. A glum Dunmer woman was seated at the only table far from the noise, so he took his drink there and sat down without invitation. It was only when he did so that he noticed that she was holding a newborn baby. "I've just come from Morrowind," he said rather awkwardly, lowering his voice. "I've been fighting for Vivek and the Duke of Mournhold against the Imperial army. A traitor to my people, I guess you'd call me." I am also a traitor to my people, said the woman, holding up her hand, which was scarred with the branded symbol. It means that I can never go back to my homeland. Well, you're not thinking of staying here, are you? Laughed Cassir. It's certainly quaint, but come wintertide, there's going to be snow up to your eyelashes. It's no place for a new baby. What is her name? Basriel. It means beauty of the forest. Where are you going? Dwinham, on the bay in High Rock. You're welcome to join me. I could use the company. He held out his hand. Cassir Whitley. Tirala, said the woman after a pause. She was going to use her family's name first, as is tradition, but she realized that it was no longer her name. I would love to accompany you. Thank you. 19th of last sea, 2920. Old Lembassi, Morrowind. 5 men and 2 women stood in the silence of the great room of the castle, the only sound the scrawl of quill of parchment and the gentle tapping of rain on the large picture window. As the prince set the seal of Cyrodiil on the document, the peace was made official. The Duke of Mournhold broke out in a roar of delight, ordering wine brought in to commemorate the end of 80 years of war. Only Sothasil stood apart from the group. His face betrayed no emotion. Those who knew him best knew he did not believe in endings or beginnings, but in the continuous cycle of which this was but a small part. My prince, said the castle steward, unhappy at breaking the celebration. There is a messenger here from your mother, the Empress. He asked to see your father, but as he did not arrive, Juliek excused himself and went to speak with the messenger. The Empress does not live in the Imperial City, asked Vivek. No, said Almalexia, shaking her head sadly. Her husband has imprisoned her in Blackmarsh, fearing that she was plotting a revolution against him. She is extremely wealthy and has powerful allies in the western Colovian estates, so he cannot marry another or have her executed. They've been at an impasse for the last 17 years since Juliek was a child. The prince returned a few minutes later. His face betrayed his anxiety, though he took troubles to hide it. My mother needs me, he said simply. I'm afraid I must leave at once. If I may have a copy of the treaty, I will bring it with me to show the Empress the good we have done today, and then I will carry it on to the Imperial City, so it may be made official. Prince Juliek left with the fond farewells of the 3 of Morrowind, as they watched him ride out into the rain-swept night south towards Blackmarsh. Vivek said, Tamriel will be much healed when he has the throne. 31st of last sea, 2920. Dorza Pass, Blackmarsh. The moon was rising over the desolate quarry, steaming with swamp gas from a particularly hot summer as the prince and his 2 guard escort rode out of the forest. The massive piles of earth and dung had been piled high in antiquity by some primitive, long-dead tribe of Blackmarsh, hoping to keep out some evil from the north. Evidently, the evil had broken through at Dorza Pass, the large crack in the sad, lonely rampart that stretched for miles. The black, twisted trees that grew on the barrier cast strange shadows down, like a net tangling. The prince's mind was on his mother's cryptic letter, hinting at the threat of an invasion. He could not, of course, tell the Dunmer about it, at the very least until he knew more and had notified his father. After all, the letter was meant for him. It was its urgent tone that made him decide to go directly to Gideon. The Empress had also warned him about a band of former slaves who attacked caravans going into Dorza Pass. She advised him to be certain to make his imperial shield visible, so they would know he was not one of the hated Dunmer slaves. Upon riding into the tall weeds that flooded through the pass like a noxious river, the prince ordered that his shield be displayed. I can see why the slaves use this, said the prince's captain. It's an excellent location for an ambush. Juliek nodded his head, but his thoughts were elsewhere. What threat of invasion could the Empress have discovered? Were the Akaviri on the seas again? If so, how could his mother from her cell in Castle Giovis know of it? A rustle in the weeds and a single sharp human cry behind him interrupted his ponderings. Turning around, the prince discovered that he was alone. His escorts had vanished. The prince peered over the stretch of the moonlit sea of grass which waved in almost hypnotic patterns to the ebb and flow of the night wind bellowing through the pass. It was impossible to tell if a struggling soldier was beneath this system of vibrations, a dying horse behind another. A high, whistling wind drowned out any sound the victims of the ambush might be making. Juliek drew his sword and thought about what to do, his mind willing his heart not to panic. He was closer to the exit of the pass than the entrance. Whatever had slain his escorts must have been behind him. If he rode fast enough, perhaps he could outrun it. Spurring his horse to a gallop, he charged for the hills ahead, framed by the mighty black piles of dirt. When he was thrown, it happened so suddenly he was hurtling forward before he was truly conscious of the fact. He landed several yards beyond where his horse had fallen, breaking his shoulder and his back on impact. A numbness washed over him as he stared at his poor, dying steed, its belly sliced open by one of the several spears jutting up just below the surface of the grass. Prince Juliek was not able to turn and face the figure that emerged from the grass, nor able to move to defend himself. His throat was cut without ceremony. Those spears that they mentioned, those were mentioned before, I believe, in one of these books. I don't remember exactly when, though. Or by who. I'd have to go back, but I'm not going to go back because I don't care quite that much. Metamor cursed when he saw the face of his victim more clearly in the moonlight. He had seen the Emperor at the Battle of Bodrum when he had fought in his Imperial Majesty's command, and this was clearly not the Emperor. Searching the body, he found the letter in a treaty signed by Vivek, Almalexia, Sathasil, and the Duke of Mournhold, representing Morrowind, and the Prince Juliek Cyrodiil, representing the Cyrodiil Empire. "Curse my luck," muttered Meramor to himself in the whispering grass. "I've only killed a prince. Where's the reward in that?" Meramor destroyed the letter, as Zook had instructed him to do, and pocketed the treaty. At the very least, such a curiosity would have some market value. He disassembled the traps as he pondered his next step. Return to Gideon and ask his employer for a lesser reward for killing the heir? Move on to other lands? At the very least, he considered, he had picked up 2 useful skills from the Battle of Bodrum. From the Dunmer, he had learned the excellent spear trap. In abandoning the Imperial army, he had learned how to skulk in the grass. The years continued in Hearth Fire. Hearth Fire, the greatest DLC ever made. Well, honestly, it's not that bad when you compare it to a lot of Oblivion DLC. Specifically, the horse armor. I don't think there's anybody that's a fan of the horse armor. But it's a funny one. It's a funny one. Hearth Fire, Book 9 of 2920, the last year of the First Era. Second of Hearth Fire, 2920, Gideon, Black Marsh. The Empress Tavia lay across her bed, a hot late summer wind she could not feel banging the shutters of her cell to and fro against the iron bars. Her throat felt like it was on fire, but still she sobbed, uncontrollably, wringing her last tapestry in her hands. Her wailing echoed throughout the hollow halls of Castle Giavis, stopping maids in their washing and guards in their conversation. One of her women came up the narrow stairs to see her mistress, but her chief guard Zook stood at the doorway and shook his head. "She's just heard that her son is dead," he said quietly. 5 of Hearth Fire, 2920, the Imperial City, Cyrodiil. "Your Imperial Majesty," said the potentate Versadu Shai through the door. "You can open the door. I assure you, you're perfectly safe. No one wants to kill you." "Mara's blood," came the Emperor Riemann III's voice, muffled, hysterical, tinged with madness. "Someone assassinated the prince, and he was holding my shield. They could have thought he was me." "You're certainly correct, Your Imperial Majesty," replied the potentate, expunging any mocking qualities from his voice, while his black, slitting eyes rolled contemptuously. "And we must find and punish the evildoer responsible for your son's death. But we cannot do it without you. You must be brave for your empire." There was no reply. "At the very least, come out and sign the order for Lady Regia's execution," called the potentate. "Let us dispose of the one traitor and assassin we know of." A brief pause, and then the sound of furniture scraping across the floor. Riemann opened the door just a crack, but the potentate could see his angry, fearful face, and the terrible mound of ripped tissue that used to be his right eye. Despite the best healers in the Empire, it was still a ghastly souvenir of the Lady Regia's work in Thurzo Fortress. "Hand me the order," the Emperor snarled. "I'll sign it with pleasure." 6th of Hearth Fire, 2920, Gideon, Cyrodiil. The strange blue glow of the Will-o'-the-Wisps. Oh, God, I fucking hate that thing. Will-o'-the-Wisps. But they call them Will of the Wisp. They don't even say Oh the Wisp. It should be O-the-Wisp, but they say the name of the thing is actually of, whatever. The strange blue glow of the will-o'-the-wisps, a combination so she'd be told of swamp gas and spiritual energy, had always frightened Tavia as she looked out her window. Now it seemed strangely comforting. Beyond the bog lay the city of Gideon. It was funny, she thought, that she had never stepped foot in its streets, though she had watched it every day for 17 years. "Can you think of anything I've forgotten?" she asked, turning to look back on the loyal Kothringi Zook. "I know exactly what to do," he said simply. He seemed to smile, but the Empress realized that it was only her own face reflecting in his silvery skin. She was smiling, and she didn't even realize it. "Make certain you aren't followed," she warned. "I don't want my husband to know where my gold's been hiding all these years, and do take your share of it. You've been a good friend." The Empress Tavia stepped forward and dropped from sight into the mists. Zook replaced the bars in the tower window and threw a blanket over some pillows on her bed. With any luck, they would not discover her body on the lawn until morning, at which time he hoped to be halfway to Morrowind. 9th of Hearth Fire, 2920. Phrygius High Rock. The strange trees on all sides resembled knobby piles crowned with great bursts of reds, yellows, and oranges, like insect mounds caught fire. The Rothgarian mountains were fading into the misty afternoon. Tirala marveled at the sight, so alien, so different from Morrowind, as she plodded the horse forward into an open pasture. Behind her, head nodding against his chest, Cassir slept, cradling Basriel. For a moment, Tirala considered jumping the low painted fence that crossed the field, but she thought better of it. Let Cassir sleep for a few more hours before giving him the reins. As the horse passed into the field, Tirala saw the small green house on the next hill, half hidden in forest. So picturesque was the image, she felt herself lull into a pleasant, half-sleeping state. A blast of a horn brought her back to reality with a shudder. Cassir opened his eyes. "Where are we?" he hissed. "I don't know," Tirala stammered, wide-eyed. "What is that sound?" "Orcs," he whispered. "A hunting party. Head for the thicket, quickly." Tirala trotted the horse into the small collection of trees. Cassir handed the child and dismounted. He began pulling their bags off next, throwing them into the bushes. A sound started then, a distant rumbling, a footfall, growing louder and closer. Tirala climbed off carefully and helped Cassir unburden the horse. All the while, Basriel watched open-eyed. Tirala sometimes worried that her baby never cried. Now she was grateful for it. With the last of the luggage off, Cassir slapped the horse's rear, sending it galloping into the field. Taking Tirala's hand, he hunkered down in the bushes. "With luck," he murmured, "they'll think she's wild or belongs to the farm, and won't go looking for the rider." As he spoke, a horde of orcs surged into the field, blasting their horns. Tirala had seen orcs before, but never in such abundance, never with such bestial confidence. Roaring with delight as the horse and its confused state, they hastened past the timber where Cassir, Tirala, and Basriel hid. The wildflowers flew into the air at their stampede, powdering the air with seeds. Tirala tried to hold back a sneeze, and thought she succeeded. One of the orcs heard something, though, and brought another with him to investigate. Cassir quietly unsheathed his sword, mustering all the confidence he could. His skills, such as they were in spying, not combat, but he vowed to protect Tirala and her babe for as long as he could. Perhaps he would slay these two, he reasoned, but not before they cried out and brought the rest of the horde. Suddenly, something invisible swept through the bushes like a wind. The orcs flew backwards, falling dead on their backs. What the fuck? Tirala turned and saw a wrinkled crone with bright red hair emerge from a nearby bush. "I thought you were going to bring him right to me," she whispered, smiling. "Best come with me." The three followed the old woman through a deep crevice of bramble bushes that ran through the field toward the house on the hill. As they emerged on the other side, the woman turned to look at the orcs feasting on the remains of the horse, a blood-soaked orgy to the beats of multiple horns. "That horse yours?" she asked. When Cassir nodded, she laughed loudly. "That's rich meat, that is. Those monsters will have bellyaches and flatulence in the morning. Serves 'em right." "Shouldn't we keep moving?" whispered Tirala, unnerved by the woman's laughter. "They won't come up here. she grinned, looking at Basriel, who smiled back. They're too afraid of us. Tarala turned to Cassier, who shook his head. Witches. Am I correct in assuming that this is old Barbin's farm, the home of the Skeffington Coven? You are, pet, the old woman giggled girlishly, pleased to be so infamous. I am Minister Skeffington. What did you do to those orcs? Asked Tarala, back there in the thicket. Spirit fist right side the head, Minister said, continuing the climb up the hill. Ahead of them was the farmhouse grounds, a well, a chicken coop, a pond, women of all ages doing chores, the laughter of children at play. The old woman turned and saw that Tarala did not understand. Don't you have witches where you come from, child? None that I know of, she said. There are all sorts of wielders of magic in Tamriel, she explained. The Psijic study magic like it's their painful duty. The battle mages in the army on other end of the scale hurl spells like arrows. We witches commune and conjure and celebrate. To fell those orcs, I merely whispered to the spirits of the air. God, she has the Thum! Armora, Pino, Talatha, the fingers of Kinnereth, and the breath of the world. With whom I have an intimate acquaintance, to smack those bastards dead. You see, conjuration is not about might, or solving riddles, or agonizing over musty old scrolls. It's about fostering relations. Being friendly, you might say. Well, we certainly appreciate you being friendly with us, said Cassier. As well you might, coughed Minister. Your friend destroyed the orc homeland 2,000 years ago. Before that, they never came all the way up here and bothered us. Now, let's get you cleaned up and fed. With that, Minister led them into the farm, and Tarala met the family of the Skeffington Coven. God, it's only the 11th of Hearth Fire? God, we've been reading this book for an age now. 11th of Hearth Fire, 2920, the Imperial City, Cyrodiil. Rija not even tried to sleep the night before, and she found the somber music played during her execution to have a soporific effect. It was as if she was willing herself to be unconscious before the axe stroke. Her eyes were bound as she could not see her former lover, the Emperor, seated before her, glaring with his one good eye. She could not see the potentate Versailles Shai, his coil neatly wrapped beneath him, a look of triumph in his golden face. She could feel, numbly, the executioner's hand touch her back to steady her. She flinched like a dreamer trying to awake. The first blow caught the back of her head and she screamed. The next hacked through her neck, and she was dead. The Emperor turned to the potentate wearily. Now that's done. You said she had a pretty sister in Hammerfell named Corda? 18 of Hearth Fire, 2920. Dwinham Highrock. The horse the witches had sold him was not as good as his old one, Cassier considered. Spirit worship and sacrifice and sisterhood might be all well and good for conjuring spirits, but it tends to spoil beasts of burden. Still, there was little to complain about. With the Dunmer woman and her child gone, he had made excellent time. Ahead were the walls surrounding the city of his homeland. Almost at once, he was set upon by his old friends and family. How went the war? Cried his cousin, running to the road. Is it true that Vivek signed a peace with the prince, but the Emperor refuses to honor it? That's not how it was it? Asked a friend, joining them. I heard that the Dunmer had the prince murdered, and then made up a story about a treaty, but there's no evidence for it. Isn't there anything interesting happening here? Cassier laughed. I really don't have the least interest in discussing the war or Vivek. You missed the procession of the Lady Corda, said his friend. She came across the bay with full entourage, and then east to the Imperial City. But that's nothing. What was Vivek like? Asked his cousin eagerly. He's supposed to be a living god. If Sheogorath steps down and they need another god of madness, he'll do. That's funny, said Cassier haughtily. And the woman? Asked the lad, who had only seen Dunmer ladies on very rare occasions. Cassier merely smiled. Tarala Skeffington flashed into his mind for an instant before fading away. She would be happy with the Coven, and her child would be well cared for, but they were part of the past now, a place in a war he wanted to forget forever. Dismounting his horse, he walked it into the city, chatting of trivial gossip of life of the Iliac Bay. Story continues in the next book, Frostfall. One would imagine. That's the only book that What? Why are these last couple books not saying that the story continues? God, I am deeply offended. Alright, well that was the third quarter of the book series. So, yeah, it's a very interesting story. I do, the way that's written reminds me a bit of like how the Game of Thrones books are written, which I really enjoy. So I've really enjoyed the series. I must admit. But yeah, that's gonna do it for this video. In the next video, we shall start robbing probably about half of the Imperial City, and then we will complete the story of 2920 in the following video after that. But until the next video, thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And goodbye.
Cause I don't wanna see the glow without you. Refuse to even leave my home without you. Or my brain's gonna explode without you. I don't even know how to cope without you. Cause I don't wanna see the glow without you. Refuse to even leave my home without you. Or my brain's gonna explode without you. I don't even know how to cope without you.